Hello everyone, this is 7th Circle Gaming, and today we're going to be talking about Wasteland 3. And we'll get started here in just a second with full disclosure. Pause the video now, read through this at your leisure, and let's move on. So, our first chapter, as always, is Immersion. What's the game going to try to do to pull players into the game world, to get them invested? Primarily, it's going to be relying on presentation. The game world is presented in an isometric perspective. The technology level that we're looking at here is basically modern 21st century post-apocalyptic level of technology, nothing too outlandish or science fiction at first. It's also going to attempt to use challenge to pull players into the game world. It's using a more slow-paced, turn-based combat. The game is also going to use player agency to pull players into the game world, where the player is presented with a good number of customization options, including upgrade paths, appearance customizations, and weapon customizations, as well as class customizations. The game is also going to attempt to use story to pull players into the game world. There's going to be as is somewhat typical for the genre, in-game events, and there is a larger plot involving some specific events, sort of bosses, that the game is structured around, we'll put it that way. And the game is also going to attempt to use audio to immerse players in the game. The audio that we're specifically talking about includes music, party banter, and typical sounds for the genre. So, for Immersion, what the game has earned is a 10 out of 15. Not at all bad. And let's move on, because we do want to show off a couple of screenshots, the first of which is just what the combat screen and the general user interface looks like. This doesn't change a whole lot between exploration and combat, so that's just something to note. And we're seeing a very typical squad-based combat. Here, not much else to add. The user interface, again, pretty standard, nothing too complicated, and let's move on. We talked a little about the customization options. This is just one of the many customization options that are available. There are about 3 of them that really are going to affect how the game plays. Those are attributes, skills, and perks. The rest affect more appearance things. So, let's move on. Before we do move on, one quick note. It is possible to show statistics rather than this graphical presentation, but by default the game shows this graphical presentation, so the game can't be really said to be using statistics focus to immerse players into the game world, because it does prefer by default this pictorial option display of statistics. So, let's move on, because we do want to talk about difficulty. The game provides several options for difficulty. We're going to show off what the selection screen looks like in a second. It does lack additional options for difficulty. It does provide some guidance on which options to select if this is maybe the player's first foray into the genre. On the other hand, the descriptions of how those will affect gameplay are brief and incomplete, because it does seem, at least during our evaluation sessions, that there were some hidden statistics, and it seemed also that the quality of items in that were dropped were affected by the difficulty level. So, what the game has earned is a 3 out of 15 for difficulty. And as we just said, this is what the difficulty selection screen looks like. As we can see, the normal, or Wasteland is what it's called, option has been selected. Friendly fire, accidental damage seem to be a big thing in this game, especially with the prevalence of area of effect weapons. Just something to keep in mind. And since there really isn't much more to cover on difficulty, let's move on. And we'll move to lasting appeal. What's going to keep players interested in playing through the game? What's going to make them maybe play through it a second time? So far, there does seem to be some DLC support. We don't really know here how much more is going to be released over time. The game does not support mods that we were able to find. That doesn't mean that they don't exist, but they are not there by default. It is possible for players to find some lasting appeal by trying different characters, different difficulty settings, or playing through the game as a Paragon or Renegade runs, or challenge runs, or that sort of thing. How likely they are going to be to actually engage in that sort of behavior depends on the player themselves. Usually the standard for this sort of genre is to assume one is the Paragon playthrough and then the other is the Renegade playthrough. So for lasting appeal, the game is dead average at 7.5 out of 15. And that's going to finish us off here with the overall score. Overall, the game has earned a 6.8 out of 15. It's an isometric RPG with turn-based combat. It doesn't necessarily appeal to all players. The story could be said to be somewhat typical. It's not necessarily cliche, but it doesn't really seem to break any new ground. In addition, we would just add that it does seem like certain classes are more useful than others, and certain weapon types are more useful than others. So, and we'll caveat this with a highly large amount of subjectivity. It does seem like melee weapons are barely useful in this game, and for the first couple of levels, the insufficient action points are something that players are going to see a lot. But if we put our objective hats back on, well, there's really nothing else to add. So we'll just say, if you watched all the way to the end, congratulations, you've reached the end of the video. There's nothing more past this. And if you do have a suggestion for a game you'd like to see, have you played Wasteland 3? Comment below, let me know what you thought, and that's all I've got to say from 7th Circle Gaming.